Order the Wednesday, April 17th board meeting for the Dr. Cog Denver Regional Council of Governments here in Denver. It is actually 6:34, and we'll begin our meeting with the call of order and the pledge. So all those, please stand and so we pledge the flag. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first thing we do is it appears we have a quorum, but we're going to determine that. We'll take roll call, please.
Eva Henry. Here. Bill Holland.
Here.
Elise Jones. Here. Dennis McCloskey. Here. Tim Mock. Tom Hayden. Michael Hancock. Paul Ryan. Chris Nevitt. Here. Jack Hilbert.
Here.
Connie McLean. Here. Don Rozier. Here. Rachel Zinzinger. Here. Bob Roth.
Here.
Sue Horn. David Spellman. Casey Becker. Suzanne Jones. Ann Justin. Cynthia Martinez. Lynn Baca. Paul Donahue. Clark Hamelman. Kathy Noon. Ron Weidman. Ron Engel. Tom Riley. Doug Tisdale. Mark Griffin. Gail Christie. Jim Benson. Jason McEldowney. Michael Ayers. Joe Baker. Todd Riddle. Here. Mike Spees. Randy Penn.
Here. Mark
Gruber. Joe Carnival. Joyce Thomas. Sharon Richardson. I'm here. Move on up. George Heath.
Welcome back.
Jennifer Weinberger. Lisa Jones. Bob Easton. Amy Shears. Henry Ergott. Matthew Skeen. Paula Bovo. Here. Marjorie Sloan. Bob Vermeulen. Ron Rakowski. Jerry Presley. Here. Jack Morgan. Christine Berg. Stacy Luberger. Adam Paul. Tom Quinn. Jim Taylor. Here. Jackie Millay. Here. Katie Witt. Here. Hank Dalton. Susan Liu. Julie Van Domelen. Sandy Banta. Ursula Morgan. Chris Wolf. Sean Foray. Joe Gearlock. Kevin Mueller. Joyce Downing. Carol Dodge. John Dyack. Cliff Mueller. Fred Lissy. Kurt Osborne. Deborah Williams. Val Vigil. Nancy McNally. Faith Winter. Joyce J. Here. Doug Young. Andrew Friedman.
Here.
Deborah Perkins Smith. And I just saw Jim Benson.
We are close. Can you get a count, please? We just so you want to know, the issue we have to take account here for on quorum, I'm asking for her to please count the president, is that we have to have 19 for a quorum, which we do. But we have two items on the agenda, item number 11 and 16 tonight, that would require a supermajority vote in order for it to pass. I would prefer to, if we don't have a supermajority present, I don't want to, oh, we may have just reached it. Anyhow, the issue would being that if we open that up, then it's an automatically fails due to lack of enough number to get it. So we have 25 and 26 here now. So when we reach those items, we may be seeking to table or to continue those immediately at that point. I hate to open them up and find ourselves in a situation if there's a call for a vote and suddenly guess what we have? We don't have, the vote would never pass because you just don't have the number of votes to pass it. And that's an unfair, I think, approach to that particular issues. So ma'am, how many do we have present?
25.
We have 25 present. That makes us 4 short of a supermajority. I know it's an odd way to start a meeting to give that instruction, but I want to make sure everybody is aware of it and understands it. Any questions about that item? Okay, well, yes, sir.
Procedurally, Jack, if we think anybody else is going to come, is it possible to move things down on the agenda just to keep them alive?
What happens, what we would do then is that we will move to those items, and at that point in time, I would probably see a motion to continue to a meeting or a date certain, and then continue those particular items straight out. Okay? I think it would be unfair to just kill them right out of the get-go. Okay? All right. With that, then, we will now move for a motion to approve the agenda as is.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion about that? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions. It does pass. Thank you very much. Report of the chair, and that is a briefing on the RTC, and we didn't have a meeting on the RTC, so that was pretty simple and straightforward. And just leave it. I will say I did want to report on one thing today, however, and that is CDOT did have a transportation commissioners luncheon for many of the regional areas, cities, and et cetera. And I think they've been making visits around the state and the region, and they will continue to do that. And we really appreciate them coming and having that luncheon. It was very beneficial. So, moving on to the report of the executive director.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just 2 or 3 items. One, I wanted to bring you up to date on some kind of late-breaking news with regard to one of the projects that you funded in your MetroVision 2035 implementation. There's been a lot of discussion about this one project in particular, construction defects, when we talked about legislation over at the State House. You approved funding for a study to help discern whether or not state law was impacting your MetroVision goals to increase density and include all housing types within urban centers, specifically multifamily for-sale housing. We'll probably be hearing a little bit more about this from Rich when he gives his legislative report this evening. But one of the things that you've heard about, too, in Rich's report is that there have been these rumors that DRCOG was going to have a report out before the end of the legislative session, that there was already some preliminary information available. We have just this week signed the contract with the company that's going to be doing that study. They had held on to the contract for quite some time before deciding to sign it. And this past week, we received a public records request from an attorney who represents homeowners. And so DRCOG has turned over a number of documents related to discussions about the construction defects project. There are a few people here in the room who have participated in those emails, which made up the greatest portion of those discussions. We'll send you all, if you were named on an email or in some other sort of correspondence in some of these records that we had to turn over through the public records request, we'll let you know in the next few days. On another topic, with regard to the board workshop, I had told you at the last meeting I'd have a more full report for you at this meeting. A couple of things to report. One is we got a lot of really good input from workshop participants with regard to MetroVision 2040 planning. We talked, or you talked a lot about a number of priorities that you wanted to see addressed in MetroVision 2040, everything from addressing first and last mile issues related to transit, to exploring local government's ability to increase revenues, preparing for the demographic shift in the aging population, and there were several transportation issues that were discussed, everything from existing TIP policy to establishing regional transportation priorities to fiscal sustainability and even more. So when we bring the annual work plan to you for approval, you'll see a lot of those things rolled up into that work plan. On the more broad issues related to the future of MVIC, how do we help board members be better prepared through training, short courses, orientation, things like that, managing conflict, looking at structures of other MPOs and COGs and best practices for MPOs and COGs. The officers and I are developing some recommendations to bring back to you, hopefully at your next meeting, so that you can talk a little bit more about what you want us to do as far as going forward with working on those issues. And then the last thing I had to report is you'll recall that as part of your MetroVision 2040 planning process, you created a Citizens Advisory Committee. There are 25 positions on that committee. We had our first meeting last night. The Denver Design Center down on Broadway donated the space. 18 of the appointees were there. They got a presentation on MetroVision, and we talked about their role in the process. And we had a very energetic and eager group of folks that were there and are very anxious in working to help you figure out how to best reach citizens and get citizen participation in the planning process. So I guess unless there are any questions, that will do it for my report.
Any questions of the Executive Director? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda. Next item is our public comment section. This item is limited to 45 minutes of total comment and is limited to 3 minutes per person who wishes to make public comment. We ask that you please do not provide any comment or any reports on any item that was part of a previous public hearing that has already been opened and shut. So if there are any open comments or any comments someone would like to come forward and address the board with at this time, now is your time. If you do so, please give us your name and your organization, please.
And Brian Elms is here. I see him in the audience now.
Great. Okay, good. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Louis Apolinar, and I'm an iron worker with the company called Rocky Mountain Reinforcement. And I would just like to bring attention to the worker abuse that's going on with this company called Rocky Mountain Reinforcement. I was working at the Denver Union Station, and this company don't like to provide no safety equipment. They wasn't giving us no breaks. We worked straight through to lunch. And also they wasn't providing water on the job. And they're also working on the Eagle P3, the DIA line to DIA. And there's just a lot of worker abuse going on. I'd just like to bring that to your attention.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone else? With that, we'll close the public comment section and we'll move on to our next section, which is item number 8. This is a presentation on Peak Performance Academy. Brian Elms, City and County of Denver. Brian, good timing, bud.
Apparently.
You ran in the door just now.
I thought I had till 7:30, but Chairman and Jennifer, nice to see you guys. Wanted to say hi. I'm Brian Elms. I'm from the City and County of Denver in the Peak Academy, and the mayor's asked me to distribute some information to everyone. So we started a program in Denver called the Peak Academy, obviously, and the program is to embed and support continuous improvement with our employees. What we do is provide training that is focused in Lean and Six Sigma techniques to create a continuous improvement methodology throughout all our departments. We also facilitate improvement events with our teams to help identify processes that are stalled, help reduce waste in a given process. And we go through a 5-day training for most of our employees. Our current focus this year is to get to about 200 employees through a 5-day training. To get 1,000 through a 4-hour training. The mayor has asked that we come to several of the local government committees. I think he was at the Metro Mayor's Caucus a few weeks ago, and then I'm here today to invite all of you, one person per municipality, free of charge for a week-long training. Anyone who would like to do that, my contact information is on the back. Our jobs so far have generated about $1.5 million in savings and efficiencies throughout the city in the 7 months that we've been running the program. Just examples of the types of work that we do in wastewater management. We worked on a project to stop sending certified mail to people we had a lien against their house or against their business. That one movement in that process saved us $60,000 annually. We've also seen tremendous benefits in our parking. We run a series of garages downtown, and we had no method to create or take checks from non-city employees. We worked with that team, identifying some problems within that process, and we have now created an automatic withdrawal system for non-city employees who use city garages. Another example that many of you might be familiar with are parking tickets. I know none of you get parking tickets, but some of you might. We had a wonderful young gentleman come to us about a process in intake on parking tickets when you went to pay. He came up with a phenomenal idea to make sure that when you pay your parking ticket and you bring your envelope as well, I don't know why people bring an envelope to where they want to pay, but they do, that we take those envelopes and put them back into circulation. I know that sounds silly, but that one thing will save us $15,000 next year in repurposing our envelopes from parking tickets. Those types of things are what we
would pay
teach.
my parking tickets.
I can't pay your parking tickets, Chairman. I'd like to. I'm nervous about that. Those types of improvements are what we look for, very simple, small changes that have dramatic effect. We're working in DHS right now in the Denver Human Services to make our benefit program provide benefits quicker to people who need them. I know that sounds shocking. We had a huge success in certifying our foster parents. It took over a year for a foster parent to be certified within our process. After we were done facilitating that improvement, it's down to 120 days. We'd like to see it done in 90. Our job is to continuously improve upon that. So if any of you are interested, hopefully there were enough one-page slicks. My phone number's on the back there. And if you're really interested, I'm sure Jennifer can connect you with me if you can't find my phone number. Any questions?
Any questions? Anyone? Mr. Nevitt.
Oh, Councilman.
Hey, Brian, nice to see you again.
Great to see you, Councilman.
It's neat what Denver is doing with respect to sort of reaching out and offering this to folks, but I don't know if people are aware of Denver Health. Denver Health was a pioneer in re-engineering this peak performance. It came out of Toyota, the continuous improvement process that Toyota invented. They were pioneers in bringing that to the healthcare arena. And Patty Gabot was, a true prophet of this. And over the course of, less than a decade, they saved on the order of $25 million. I mean,
yeah.
Just tons of money. So Brian's talking about some stuff that seems like, yeah, it's cool, seems kind of small, but seems kind of cool. But you add that up and you multiply it across all the processes in a system, and it turns into real money real quick.
Sure.
And Denver Health is it's absolutely amazing what they've managed to do.
I would actually add to Councilman Nevitt's statement. They've saved $170 million in 7 years, and we definitely stand on shoulders of giants. And a lot of the work that we are doing comes out of the Lean Academy there. And just so you are aware, our goal for the year in process improvement savings is in the $10 million range.
Councilman Taylor.
You talked about this being a week-long academy. Are you able to share the dates when that might occur?
Yes, and actually on our website for the next year, we have all of the dates laid out. I believe the next one is in May 24th that week, and it follows, I believe, the third week of every month till the end of the year, and then we'll do it again next year. I mean, I would love to see all of you in a training. I obviously can't accommodate everyone in one training, so hopefully we'll spread it out and continue to help you guys as well.
Great. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Appreciate you being here this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to our next item, which is our consent agenda item. We have one item on the consent agenda, which is the minutes. Anyone want the minutes pulled for corrections, changes, updates? Seeing none, I would need action for the consent agenda, please.
So moved.
We have a motion. Do we have a second? We have a motion. We have a second. All those in, any discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, nay. Abstentions. Does pass. We move on now to our action agenda. In our action agenda, the first item we have is item number 10, which is a discussion of the state legislative issues. This is broken out into two areas, A and B. The first area is for previous positions or bills that we have previously taken a position on. The second item will be consideration of new action on new bills. Mr. Morrow, if you would please begin.
Oh, there we go. Thank you. Thank you. So first, on the bills that you've taken a position on before, I'll mention briefly, Jennifer talked about the construction defects bill, Senate Bill 52. That bill was heard on Monday and again on this afternoon and was killed today, was postponed indefinitely. There was actually just two brief mentions of the Dr. Coggs study, and there did seem to be some interest in it from a couple of the members of the committee, so we'll follow up with them and see how real that interest is. And this issue may be back again next year. There may be work on it over the summer, so we'll be monitoring that issue and work with those who are interested in it. We'll certainly inform them of the results of our study when it goes forward. But as for the legislative session this year, that issue's done. Is there any thoughts or comments on that? Okay, the other bill that I just wanted to mention, update you on, is Senate Bill 127, which is the one we've been working on a lot for increasing funding for the Older Coloradans Fund. It's passed through the Senate and is in waiting hearing in House Finance Committee. It is increasing the Older Coloradans Fund by $2 million, so that would go from $8 million to $10 million. In addition to that, we were successful in getting an additional $2 million of one-time general fund monies in the long bill this year. So actually, there'll be a statewide increase for senior services of $4 million this year, and a guarantee of at least $2 million increase over current law for next year, and actually an invitation from the legislators to come back and ask for more. So I'm anticipating that we will be back again. And that bill is calendared for May 1st for hearing in House Finance, and we're optimistic that it'll be fine there. With the new bills, have 3 bills for you. I think that's attachment C, and we can treat these as a consent agenda if you agree with the staff recommendation, or I'm happy to discuss any of the bills. I did know, I think it was Senate Bill 1272, Val Vigel testified in favor of that today. Is that right? But other than that, we got two we're recommending to support and 1 to monitor.
Okay, we have a staff recommendation for support for House Bill 1272, monitor for Senate Bill 257, and support for Senate Bill 209. If we so choose, we can take it from the body as a whole, or we can take them individually. So I'm looking for action, and that can start with somebody starting something. Mr. Taylor.
I move that we accept the staff's recommendation on these 3 bills.
We have a motion and a second to move them forward as a whole to accept the staff recommendation. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Abstentions. It does move forward. Thank you very much, sir.
All right.
Okay, we move on to the next item on our agenda. And the next item is actually item number 11. At this point in time, I would like staff to please take a head count and make sure what we have regarding a quorum status. Pardon?
26.
We have 26 voting members present at this point in time, which puts us short on there. So we have one of two choices we can, and so if I don't get action soon, I'll probably have to open up this particular item. So I would accept a motion to continue to the next meeting, or we can start the conversation.
Could we postpone till a little bit later this evening to see if we get more people, and if not, postpone to the next meeting?
You can make a motion to
I would like to make
readjust
a
the
motion
agenda at this point, and you could ask
that
to have it
effect.
moved to the end of the agenda. Okay, we have a motion, a second, to move item number 11 to the end of the action item agenda. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion on that? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Abstentions. Does pass. We'll move item number 11. We'll pick that up at the end of the agenda.
Jack,
at this
can
point
you
then.
clarify, excuse me, how many people we need to come in order to?
29.
And we have 26? We have 26. Thank you.
Okay. And moving on now to item number 12. Item number 12, we'll be seeking a motion to approve a process for selecting the 2014-2015 FTA Section 5310 projects in the Denver-Aurora urbanized area. This is attachment E in your agenda, please. And this would be presented to us by Jacob Reiger, Senior Transportation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as the Chair just said, this is attachment E in your packet, in electronic version PDF. It's pages 28 through 32. So the Federal Transit Administration's, or FTA's, 5310 program funds projects that improve mobility for the elderly and individuals with disabilities. 5310 funded projects are intended to fill geographic, service, client, or other gaps, as well as extending service beyond RTD's Access-a-Ride program. DRCOG is initiating the process to select 5310 projects for 2014 and 2015 within the Denver-Aurora urbanized area. CDOT selects 5310 projects elsewhere in our DRCOG region and across the state. In your packet are details of the proposed selection process, which are the peer review panel composition, the evaluation criteria, peer review panel application, scoring and selection process, and project type categories. The key milestones in this process are that depending on action tonight, we intend to issue a call for applications in the next few days. Those applications would be due in early June. TAC, RTC, and board action on project funding recommendations would occur in July and August. The TAC recommendation is that you approve the proposed 5310 selection process, which is outlined as alternative 1 in your packet. And with that, I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions of staff? Well, seeing none, I would be looking for action then, please.
Mr. Chairman.
Action or question? Well, I look for somebody to say something.
I'm for selecting FY 2014 and 15 FTA Section 5310 projects in the Denver region.
Second.
We have a motion. We have a second. Okay. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Opposed, nay. Abstentions? Seeing none, it does pass. Moving forward, then. Moving on to item number 13. This is a motion to approve the regional TDM pool process for fiscal matters of 2014 and 15. This is attachment F, presented by Melina Dempsey, Transportation Planner. Melina?
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Melina Dempsey, and we'll be referring to attachment F, pages 35 through 41. I'm going to start with a very brief overview of the TDM pool program. Every 2 years, the board approves eligibility rules, the selection criteria, and a process for choosing transportation demand projects to be funded to the TDM pool, which is identified in the Transportation Improvement Program, also known as the TIP. TDM projects decrease the use of single-occupant vehicles and thereby reduce congestion and improve air quality. With one exception, the TAC is recommending the manner in which to choose the next slate of TDM projects for fiscal years 2014 and 2015. The one exception concerns using TDM funds to pay for small infrastructure projects. An example of a small infrastructure project would be a fixed or permanent bicycle parking infrastructure. Historically, the board has approved very limited TDM funds for this purpose, and moreover, CDOT is not in favor of doing so. But some communities and local TMAs, the Transportation Management Associations, do support using TDM funds for this purpose. One problem with using the federal funds for small infrastructure projects is that it substantially increases the cost and administrative overhead relative to the funds allocated to the project. And even with small projects, the right-of-way issues can be quite burdensome. And then on the other hand, the problem with disallowing the use of federal TDM funds for small infrastructure projects prevents local governments from accessing non-local sources of money for such projects. The question before you tonight is whether or not small infrastructure projects should be eligible for funding with TDM pool funds. Once you decide that, the TAC recommendation is that you, the board, approve its proposed rules, criteria, and process. And with that, does anybody have any questions?
Any questions? Elise.
Well, it's more of a comment speaking on behalf of a jurisdiction who has used these funds in the past for small projects. I guess I would like to argue in favor or against the staff recommendation on this particular point. I think we need to let local governments continue to choose whether or not it makes sense for them to seek small pots of funding for smaller infrastructure projects. A lot of what we're wrestling with in terms of making multimodal solutions work is the first and last mile, and often those solutions can be relatively small cost, like putting up bike shelters. And the fact that they're small costs should be a good thing. We shouldn't be looking just to fund big projects. If solutions can be small and cost effective and work for local governments, why shouldn't we support them? So I guess I would like to argue for continuing allowing local governments to use this pot of funding for those types of projects. I know it's not convenient for CDOT, but it's actually effective for local governments, and I really think it's in keeping with Dr. Cogg's multimodal vision to support those efforts.
Okay.
Any other questions? Mr. McCluskey.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think I partially agree with my mate from Boulder in the standpoint this could be related to our TODs that we're spending an awful lot of money on to move people in corridors. I think that we have in the past looked at those as being part of the whole project. I think the disagreement, as I recall, has been when those small projects seem to be disconnected from that immediate project that is a TOD, a transportation connection. And I think that's where, I mean, I've listened to the debates over the last few years, and that seems to be the wide difference. So I think I'd tend to say be permissive, let the local government take their chance with convincing the board to do that. And it seems that the board overall has been supportive of that small project when it is directly connected to the multimodal facility that's being put in, whether it's a bus or if it's a light rail station. If it's enhancing that ability, then it's more likely to succeed. When it becomes distant from that, even though it might be the 15-minute community or the last mile, still would be an extension of that, the board then may not see it that way because it isn't as clearly connected. But that seems to be where our base argument has been. I would like to see us permit communities to try to submit this and do so in a manner that makes the whole project function.
Ms. Millay?
I guess I have a question, first of all. In the past, it's not clear to me whether this has been allowed or not, or has it just been discouraged? Are we changing these eligibility rules?
So in the past, small infrastructure types of projects were allowed. We've had a couple types of projects. One was a downtown bicycle parking project. That one was canceled because I believe there's a lot of right-of-way issues experienced with that one. There was also a bus then bike shelters throughout Boulder County where they implemented 2 to 3 shelters. And I believe there were some delays with that one as well, that they were able to implement it finally. Those are the only 2. And then rolling stock is allowed. That would be, funding bicycles. That type of stuff doesn't require environmental clearance or right away.
So were those projects that were permissible, were those exceptions in the past, or is this something that has been allowed in the past and you're asking if we should allow it to continue?
I think in the past it's typically just has been programs and marketing, and then in the past 2 cycles we started to see the evolution of seeing these types of projects. I don't think it was what the pool was intended for, but now we're starting to see a demand for these types of projects.
And, just one more question before I want to make my comment. And it's my understanding that at the TAC, the motion to approve or recommend this to the board failed at the TAC. It did not. It wasn't that they couldn't reach consensus. It was that a vote was taken, and that the motion failed.
There was no consensus on it. It was divided.
So the motion failed?
Yes.
Okay. At the TAC. So the TAC.
That's correct.
Okay.
So it defaulted to the board.
Okay.
Jennifer, you had some comments?
Just wanted to, I guess, add some clarification to what Melina was saying, that in past history, this money has been typically used by the TMAs, the US 36 Commuting Solutions, Transportation Solutions, the former Southeast Business Partnership, TMA, et cetera, to do outreach and talk with employers about using alternative methods to get employees back and forth to work. But in very recent history, there's been a push to do bricks and mortar with these monies. And it's not so much that, I mean, we certainly don't oppose bricks and mortar. Elise makes good points that, you know, there are, it's good that there are small projects that are bricks and mortar and that can be done. The problem is that even with your current tip policy, you've said that don't even make a submission unless it's $300,000 or more, unless you're a very small community, and then you can submit projects that are $200,000 or more. But the purpose of that is to reduce the contracting and the oversight and the overhead associated with putting federal money into a project. These projects are even smaller, I think maybe about $50,000 to $200,000, somewhere in that range. So again, you're spending CDOT is spending more time, as is the local jurisdiction or the TMA, whoever the project sponsor is, on making this work, because you've now quote unquote federalized it. And as you all know, when you put federal money into a project, you've complicated it. So, but also, as Melina was pointing out, the issue is that if you have these small projects, you can't compete for the big tip dollars, because you have to have a project that costs at least $300,000. So this is really the only place to go. So we've discouraged it in the past because one, it was really used for education and outreach and those sorts of things. But communities are now seeing that if they want to do these small projects and they don't have local dollars, this is the only pot that they can go to.
Elise?
Yeah, I would just like to emphasize that point. There really aren't very many pots of money available for this types of projects, and they're very complementary with the traditional education projects and really sort of add bang to the buck. And I think allowing local governments to decide if it makes sense to federalize the project, if they can make it all work, we're leaving it up to local governments to decide and keeping it permissive and basically allowing it to continue as it has been in the past. So again, I would strongly encourage support for Alternative 2 over Alternative 1 for that reason.
Councilwoman Millay.
So, and I guess coming from a small community where we don't necessarily have access to all the dollars that the larger communities have, I still have a fundamental problem with federalizing projects that are this small, because I just feel like our transportation dollars are so limited in this area, and even though it's perceived as a small amount of money, the money that's going to just the admin overhead on these projects, to me, really underscores the purpose of us trying to maximize the benefit from our transportation dollars. And it doesn't mean that I don't have empathy for the small community that doesn't have a resource to go to, but I think as we move forward and as a small community, I recognize I need to bring match dollars to the table. And sometimes, in fact, the match dollars can pay for the project if you don't federalize the project. And I just have a real concern with all of that money not actually going into bricks and mortar, but going into the admin and overhead on a project. So I have much sympathy, but I just could not, I would, recommend that we don't allow it.
Deborah?
I just want to reiterate, CDOT at the regions has looked at the cost of projects in the past, and as Jennifer was saying, $300,000 seems to be the limit at which it makes sense that it's reasonable. You are spending a disproportionate amount in terms of the administrative function and also the NEPA compliance because you federalized it. And as Jackie was saying, the question is that a wise use of DRCOG's funds? So that is the reason that CDOT in the past has not, well, right now is not necessarily supportive of going to smaller projects.
Okay. Any other comments? Yes, Mayor, go ahead. Would you please?
I move that we approve alternative 2.
Second.
We have a motion to approve alternative 2. Would someone please read alternative 2? Let me find it here.
It's to approve the regional TDM pool process as outlined, but make infrastructure projects eligible.
Okay. So we have a motion. We have a second. Any other discussion? Okay. At this point in time, we are going to take a vote. I don't know if it's going to need a hand vote, but I think for all just purposes and sake to find out. So all those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. So we have 14-14? Based upon rules and protocol, 14-14 equals a no vote. So the matter does not pass at this point in time. Okay?
I'd like to make a motion we approve alternative 1.
We have a motion for alternative 1. Any discussion? Can we please read alternative 1? Or
we
summarize
need to do something.
Summarizing alternative 1, which is the attachment describes, let's see, basically I'll let you summarize. Go ahead and do summarizing. Alternative
Okay.
1, I'm not reading this thing.
Alternative 1 would be to approve the poll process, which includes the staff recommendation to not fund infrastructure projects.
Okay. So that is the motion. That is the second. We've had no other discussion. At this point in time, all those in favor, please raise your hand.
That's all right. Chris, come on.
All those opposed, please raise your hand.
Hey, that's my idea. Yeah.
What's the vote, ma'am? 15-12. We obviously have one abstention or no vote. So at this point in time, it does pass. So option 1 did pass. Moving on now to item number 14. This is a motion to provide, be seeking a motion to provide direction to staff regarding CDOT's RAMP program. This is attachment G. Steve Cook, please. Before we move on, for the chair's prerogative, we would like to do one other thing while you prepare, sir. Can we please get a roll call count once again, or head count, please?
You're still one short. That's right.
Okay, we have 28 present. Keep making phone calls.
All right. I apologize I'm late. I thought Casey wasn't able to make it.
You know what? That was a good thing you saved that bill one time earlier. That's all I'm going to tell you.
I'm my best.
You need one more sister. That's what you got to get. So, Too bad you weren't triplets. That's all I can say. So anyhow, okay. Moving on to item number 14, please, Steve Cook.
Should I go ahead? Okay, this is attachment G of your packet. I'm not going to go over everything in the beginning of it in detail, but we are going to be talking about CDOT's RAMP process. So that's the responsible acceleration of maintenance and partnerships. And I'm really just going to go over the MVIC recommendations from a couple of weeks ago. Their recommendation number 1 regarding RAMP projects that may be submitted from agencies or communities within the DRCOG region is to remain neutral on all the project applications that come in and do not provide any individual letters of support for the projects. So just remain neutral. So that's their first recommendation. MVIC's second recommendation is that projects that are RAMP eligible, and that's going to be determined by CDOT, those specific pre-applications that are eligible, and I believe that's May 31st that they're going to make those determinations by. So for projects that are RAMP eligible and are identified in the current regional transportation plan, that for those, DRCOG will indicate its full support for those projects. The third recommendation from MVIC is that once again for the projects that are determined to be RAMP eligible by CDOT but are not specifically identified in the current fiscally constrained RTP, that for these projects meetings will be held as necessary to review those projects for consistency with the regional transportation plan. That would likely occur sometime in the June to August time frame of having those meetings. At that time, the board can determine those projects that are consistent with the goals, policies, action strategies of the regional transportation plan, and for those can then indicate DRCOG's full support for those projects. If it is determined that there are projects that are not consistent with the goals, policies, action strategies of the regional transportation plan, at that time the board will determine what, if any, action to take on those projects. As an FYI, regardless of DRCOG's input on the eligible projects, CDOT can still include on its final list any project that they determine to be eligible can be on the list for RAMP funding. But we note that DRCOG, the DRCOG board, still decides whether or not to add, if there is a major project on there, the board must still decide whether to add that into the fiscally constrained regional transportation plan. That's kind of a long one there. And the fourth recommendation to note is that DRCOG will adjust its RTP, Regional Transportation Plan, amendment schedule as needed to accommodate RAMP project implementations, RAMP project implementation schedules. So if there's any project that's selected for RAMP that needs to go through environmental studies and things like that, we will work to adjust our plan amendment schedule to get that project in the plan as soon as we can. And so the motion that's requested is to provide direction to staff regarding CDOT's RAMP program.
Okay, before we open this up, I would like to just point out one thing on this particular item. Just keep this in mind. These are revenues and sources of monies that are not part of our standard TIP process. This is outside the element in the realm of what we typically see for financing these projects. So it kind of like throws everything up in the air from that regard. And very difficult to try to put it back into that funnel. I would like to just keep us cognizant of one thing also. We put our partner, CDOT, into a very precarious situation, as well as community partners who are here when they have access or have been given approval for a project, and for some reason we want to pull that carpet on that project. I just want us to be cognizant. We need to be careful as we move forward with this, because I believe this RAMP process is going to have to be a very collaborative process. Mr. Taylor, you had your hand up first.
Well, first of all, Steve, I want to congratulate you on capturing the discussion that we had at MVIC. It was a very long and involved discussion with not being unanimous by any means, but I think you captured what MVIC came forward with as our recommendations, and so I'd like to move that we adopt the MVIC recommendations for moving this forward.
Second.
We have a motion. We have a second. Further discussion. Elise.
Yeah, I agree with the motion and intend to vote for it, and agree that staff did a good job of capturing the conversation. I had a couple of questions, though. As I understand it, the ramp funding isn't new money. It's just moving up existing funds to the current date. And I don't fully understand if a project is funded with ramp funding and that isn't on the RTP, how does that impact the likelihood of the timing of funding for projects that are currently on the RTP?
I will bring that to the director for comment.
I think that's a very good question, and it's certainly one that we have talked about internally and approached with CDOT as well. What does that do? Because if a project is identified as ramp eligible and it's not in the RTP, and you amend it into the RTP, and these aren't new monies, what then in the RTP is going to be deferred or maybe even taken out of the RTP? And so at some point I would assume, and Deb can speak to this far better than me, but at some point I would assume that CDOT would present a STIP amendment that would help us understand what we would have to change in our TIP and in their RTP in order to accommodate this advancing of money. Because again, it's a one-for-one thing. It's not new money.
Deborah, would you mind, please?
Sure. This question has come up, and we had the same question at CDOT because of the fiscally constrained issue. We've had several discussions with FHWA, and where we are right now is, I'm going to simplify it. We could identify it as almost like a footnote that we're actually changing our budgeting process, and therefore these funds are available for use. It's not new money, but because of a change in our budgeting process, there is more money that could be spent. And so the intent would be, and FHWA has been at these discussions with MPO staff throughout the state, that the intent is not to take off projects that are in your RTP. So that is not the intent. And FHWA has agreed to help work with us as we go forward to figure out how to do this. This is new to them as well.
Ms. Millay.
I just had a clarifying question. Could you go back to the previous slide regarding the FYI? So regardless of DRCOG input, CDOT can include on its final list any projects for ramp funding. However, if DRCOG chooses not to put those projects in the RTP, does the project become ineligible?
The project will not be able to be implemented because ramp includes within it federal dollars, and DRCOG must identify in the TIP or in the RTP any project.
That just hasn't been spelled out anywhere, and that's what I've heard, but I just wanted to document that was
Deborah, could you please address that also?
So that's right. So what Steve said, the intent is like any other project that comes in for amendment. You have a choice to decide whether or not you should amend your plan. And if you decide that the plan should not be amended and you don't accept that project, then essentially the project is done and those funds would go to whatever is next in line on the ramp list.
I would like to just, if you can, prerogative here, let me just give you the consequences of doing that. Here's the difference between TIP funding sources when we do it every year versus the pool there versus this project. In the TIP funding, we have a select pool. We don't lose that money. No matter what, it's a fixed dollar amount, and we can reallocate it anywhere in our region we want. We don't do the RTP money on the ramp. That money doesn't come to us as a pool source that says we get to distribute it. No. That money comes to us as CDOT saying, we've selected a project in your area. Now, we understand you have an administrative process whether or not you want to accept it, but if you don't, believe you me, the next project could be in Lamar, it could be in Grand Junction, it could be somewhere else on their list of priorities. Now, that's the thing that makes this totally different and makes it also why I said before we need to be very cautious how we present and we approach these particular dollars as they go in. That being said, however, as we discussed it in NIMBIC, there's another part of this, and that is when you look at the criteria for being in the RTP, it's got to be funded. So some would say, well, wait a minute, you're jumping into the RTP, and are you really fully qualified? Well, on the other hand, I'm just telling you, then if you're wanting to give money to another jurisdiction, give it away and not accept it. That's the consequences of us not understanding the collaborative partnership that we're going to have to demonstrate. So, consequence right there. Dennis.
Yeah, I think you nailed part of that whole issue, Jack. It reminds us of the change in funding from ARA, Son of ARA. Everything's been in motion for the last few years. So a lot of discussions we're talking about, what is our regular system? Well, the reality is we don't have a regular system right now for many reasons, and that's why people have a lot of anxiety. The accounting technique that we're using, the one-time money, I guess the concern is that not understanding what is actually ever going to happen in the future with federal funding. That's instead of the accounting that we had before was a bank that we were holding for years ahead that seemed mindless to hold up a project. But with the predictability of future federal dollars, one of the questions out there is, if that takes another big dive, what does that do to us? Right. So those are things that none of us really have an answer to. Right. But it's that environment.
Ms. Jones, you had a Suzanne?
Yeah, in keeping with trying to better understand this process, I guess one of my questions is, and maybe Deborah will be able to answer this, is how CDOT's going to handle Dr. Cog's feedback if it's received before August 9th when you CDOT ranks the projects versus before August 30th when the project program is released. And if it's going to make a difference whether we should orient our schedule so that our feedback is received at the best time.
Deborah.
Do you want me to respond? I looked at the schedule that was in your packet, and that seemed to fit with what CDOT was doing. Just so you understand, there's a difference between ranking the projects and developing a program. Because some of the money, there's color of money in there. Some money can only be used for specific things, such as bridge or whatever. We have to look at how the projects fare, but then also what the color of money is, and then develop the program based on that color of money and how much is available. So your feedback would be valuable to us in terms of looking at that. If you had two projects that were very similar and you could tell us, we don't think this one would make it in terms of being amended into the plan, that would certainly be helpful for us to know.
Wait, can
Jackie?
you?
Oh, excuse me.
I was just going to say, can you just clarify the timing on when it would best be received?
Any time in that August time period would be fine.
Any time before the 30th?
Yes, I would. If you can get the middle of the month, that would be best, I think.
Jackie?
I guess I just want to go back to an earlier comment in the sense that just because something's been on the list for a long time doesn't necessarily mean it makes the most sense to move forward with our dollars. And I think at our board workshop we talked about kind of being nimble and being able to respond to our changing world, our changing demographics, and I think that the RAMP program gives us an opportunity to do that. So I'm just going to, this is just in the future as we start looking at these RAMP projects, I think we really need to be open to which projects make the most sense and can have the biggest impact on transportation in the region, and not just because it's been on a list longer. Sometimes the new ideas are the fresh ideas. So, and my hat is off to MVIC. I was on family vacation for MVIC, so I'm sure you're thrilled I wasn't there to participate, but I have to say, I really am impressed with the diligence with which you guys the MVIC members went through this. So thank you for doing that and doing all the heavy lifting. So those of us who just show up at the board meeting can come in at the end and just ask the clarifying questions. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? At this point, I will call the question then. The motion on the table was to accept the MVIC recommendation. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please say nay. Any abstentions? It does pass. Thank you very much. Moving on to item number 15. This will be looking for a motion to adopt the MVIC recommendation to allow the current CDOT DRCOG funding equity MOU to expire and begin a process to formulate a new funding agreement with CDOT, the outcome of which will be determined at a later date. Jennifer Schaffel, please. This, by the way, this is attachment H in your agenda, please.
And that's pretty much the MVIC recommendation. Just to refresh your memory, DRCOG since 2004, of November of 2004, has had a funding equity MOU that was put in place to end many years of escalating conflict with regard to what the Denver region's share of transportation revenues was fair. This was taking into account that the region is more than 50% of the state's population, about 2/3 of the state's economy. It contributes significantly to retail sales, income tax, etc. The MOU said that the DRCOG region would get a baseline of about 38% of state transportation revenues. And if something happened that those revenues increased, there would be an additional increase for DRCOG. And also, in addition to that, there was a kind of a carrot put into the MOU for DRCOG so that CDOT could count on DRCOG to help advance new funding proposals. So any new transportation revenue sources that came to the state, DRCOG would even get a bigger piece of that pie. So again, this was first put in place in November of 2004. It has been extended on 2 separate occasions, and now it is set to expire this summer. I might mention too that Pikes Peak Area COG also has an MOU with CDOT that expires this summer. So the issue in front of MVIC was to give staff some guidance as to what to do now that this MOU is expiring. Many of you will recall that CDOT Director Hunt was here in, I think it was January of this year, and the MOU came up, and we talked a little bit about that, and he said that neither he nor the transportation commissioners were wild about MOUs, but he wasn't saying yes, but he also wasn't saying no. And then many of you here this evening also had a dinner back in the fall with a number of the transportation commissioners where the MOU was discussed as well, and certainly the commissioner from the Pikes Peak area was adamantly opposed to MOUs. And you know, I kind of liken the MOU to, I can see the commissioner's point of view because I kind of liken it to what we've done to the state constitution with regard to funding. There's so much in the Constitution that says what has to be funded and how that the legislature's hands are somewhat tied when it comes to making decisions. So that's probably why they're not that excited about it. But then on the other hand, when we had seen our historical revenues going from about 40% of state revenues down to almost 28%, the board got very enthusiastic about making a change, and that resulted in the MOU. So what MVIC discussed was, what do we do now? It's expiring in June, so what do we do? What do we do now? The recommendation from MVIC was to go ahead and let the current MOU expire. I don't think that anyone thinks that we could necessarily achieve a new MOU with CDOT in such a short period of time. At the same time, writing a letter to the state, including the governor, the transportation commissioners, and Executive Director Hunt, addressing the region's significance in the state, again, 50% of the population, 2/3 of the economy, et cetera, and that the board would propose sitting down with CDOT in the near future to formulate a new funding agreement. One of the things that MVIC did talk about was that, you know, maybe it wouldn't be possible to come up with a percentage, but maybe there could be some other language put into an MOU that everyone could agree on but would address funding equity. So again, the MVIC recommendation is to allow the current MOU to expire, to concurrently write a letter to the state addressing the region's significance in the state, and propose that CDOT and DRCOG sit down in the near future to formulate a new funding agreement.
Before we turn this over, I do want to point out one thing. One of the esteemed members who's not a member of the board tonight, but is one of our, did ask that question today of the transportation commissioners and Director Hunt, what the feeling on the MOU was. And I think I'm obligated to share that, and the answer is very, very simple. Listen, the funding sources have changed significantly. We don't have huge amounts of dollars. The state has cut dollars, the feds have cut dollars, and everybody in the state would like to have their own MOU. So we're not going to enter an agreement with any MOU, because under these funding requirements and these limited resources we have today, we can't function under that environment. Frankly, they're not going to entertain an MOU. I'm just going to tell you that straight up. That's my opinion, and I had 2 private conversations, and I just believe that's where they're headed. The board, I will leave it to you to determine which action you want. I don't have a problem. I will tell you this was not unanimous at MBIC. I was the only declining vote. So anyhow, no, it was. Oh, Don too. That's right. It was 2 votes. I'm sorry. I had to throw that as a joke. But we do have 3 options to do as we want to approach this particular item, and we have the MBIC recommendation, which is the letter that you see attached in your package. We also have 2 other options that are in there. One is to take absolutely no action, and the other one is to take no action and figure out what we're going to do in the future. So at this point, I'd look to the board for any action. Yes, sir, Mr. Nevitt.
I just put the motion on the floor to adopt the MVIC proposal.
Second.
We have a motion to adopt the MVIC proposal. We do have a second. Any discussion? Mr. Taylor.
Well, I just want to say that there are 6 of us sitting around these tables today that were at that lunch meeting with CDOT commissioners today, and Jack is exactly right. There's no way we'll get an MOU out of CDOT. They talked about asset management. They talked about the bridge enterprise. They talked about other solutions that may be coming down the pike, but there's going to be no MOU available from them at all.
Jackie?
I still, and I would agree, and I would say, from my opinion, Mr. Hunt said, basically there's not going to be enough money left over. All we're going to be able to do is maintain our existing system with the funding that we're expecting. So there's nothing left. It's not that I don't want to have an MOU, but I have nothing to put in that MOU, and everybody doesn't think they're getting their fair share. But I still don't see anything wrong with DRCOG expressing to CDOT the fact that we contribute a significant amount of money and want that taken into consideration. I don't care if you want to call it an MOU negotiation or not, but I still feel like DRCOG needs to take some action, even if it isn't to negotiate the MOU, to have the conversation saying we understand you're not go on record with what Jennifer wrote in here as far as the facts and the amount of money that this region is contributing, saying we understand you're not entering into MOUs at this point, but go ahead, Jennifer. Sounds like you.
I was just going to say that was actually the recommendation that staff made at MVIC, but there was a definite desire by the members of MVIC to at least give it a go, to not only let the MOU expire and to write the letter, but to stress to the state that the board was desirous of having those conversations. And Deb mentioned at the meeting too that, you know, because I had said, you know, part of what we were going to be doing would be watching the state and seeing how much money the region did get, and making sure that, you know, if the board felt like it wasn't getting its fair share, that we would let the state know that. And Deb said that, you know, we have an MOA that says this is how we're going to do transportation planning in the region. They do have reports and other mechanisms to let us know how the money is being invested throughout the state. So even if you don't get an MOU, you are able to get the information that allows you to find out, compared to other areas of the state, how much is coming here, so that if you feel like you need to take action, be it at the legislature or in the governor's office or wherever, you could still do that.
Deborah, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
You know, Jennifer brought up exactly what I was going to say. Just because there isn't an MOU, or, you know, at this point, the intent is that we would still be collaborative, even if there wasn't some sort of paper in place. I think identifying a specific percentage or dollar amount, as Jackie was saying, is very, very difficult. The funding programs have changed. Our requirements have changed. We are now required to do asset management. And in the past, people who are new may not know this, but by formula we used to allocate out to the regions, so out to the CDOT regions. So then based on that, each region knew how much money they were going to get, and then the local governments could figure out how much money they were going to get. So it was very easy to identify that. What's required now under MAP 21, and what's required by us, and if you heard Don Hunt today at lunch, we could lose our federal funding if we don't meet these performance targets. We have to have asset management in place, and it has to have targets in it. We have to meet those targets, both for that and, say, like the surface treatment for our NHS and interstate. If we don't meet those targets, we can lose our funding. So by saying we have to spend so much money in one area versus another, you may actually be putting yourself in a difficult position. So the whole context has changed. And I did want to mention one other thing. Because MAP 21 changed all that, we are currently starting this coming month the State Transportation Advisory Committee, which Beth sits on that for you. We've asked for a working group to get together to look at some of these funding programs, and so how should we do them? And it's because they're all new, and these rules are all new to us. So we're actually asking for help through that process. So we won't even know for several months what falls out of that in terms of process or formulas or what our targets should be. So anything right now is just conjecture, I think, at this point. So I just wanted to put that in context for you. One other piece of information, Jennifer, the stats that are in your letter are accurate. There is one other thing you should be aware of so that you understand the context of your discussion within the state and other MPOs and the TPRs. Within the DRCOG region, you have 16%, only 16% of the state highways. So when other areas who have a lot more start talking about, they use that number instead of the population number. So you should be aware of that. You don't have 50% of the roadways. You only have 16%. So I just wanted to share that with you. Not that it should change anything that you're doing, but I just wanted you to be aware of that fact.
Councilman Taylor.
And Deborah, I don't argue with those figures, but the fact is an awful lot of the metropolitan areas have taken over state highways to take care of them ourselves. And so that number, if you look back historically to what it was, would be considerably higher. But because we've taken it over through devolution, that number has now changed.
We know, I should mention this, under MAP 21, we're now talking about enhanced NHS. So the more roadways will be on the NHS system, and most of those are in the metropolitan areas. And if we set targets, it's actually going to force us to put our money in those locations, because MAP 21 requires it on NHS, whether it's on system or off. We need to be looking at that, and it'll also set targets that where DRCOG has to spend its money. So, Jim, you're right. Maybe some of those things changed, but now there's something else that kind of changed it back a little bit, I think.
Okay, Jackie?
Well, given the discussion that's occurred, I mean, I don't think it makes sense to move forward with the MVIC recommendation since CDOT is not going to be entertaining MOUs, but I do think it's worth saying we understand the MOU is expiring, and we want to work collaboratively with you, and we would like acknowledgement and recognition of the financial contribution that the DRCOG region makes to the state transportation, and we would hope that it would be considered in any asset management strategies, blah, blah, blah. I mean, probably going back to what the staff's original recommendation might have been to MVIC.
Mr. Vigil.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to speak in favor of the motion and the MVIC recommendation. I guess I personally am not ready to lay over and play dead because somebody tells me I'm not going to accept an MOU. I think that from my standpoint, and I'm not talking about the rest of you, but from my standpoint, I represent my constituents, and I was sent up in here to fight for my constituents. And I'm not ready to give that fight up. I think that whether we reach it or not, whether we can see that it's unreachable is not the point. The point is that we need to go on record and saying that, look, we feel very strongly that we should have our fair equity in the DRCOG region. And I think we need to go on record on saying that. I'm not talking about any percentages, because we don't know what the figure is, and the percentage is not really that bad. I mean, when you're talking about set dollars, because if you only have, if the funds go down and you only have, X amount of dollars, the percentage still works, because you're still a percentage of whatever you have. If you have zero, then you get that percentage of zero. I mean, that's the bottom line. So as long as we don't deal with figures, then that's numbers, dollar numbers, that's fine. But I am not ready to go ahead and say, well, Director Hunt said I'm not going to accept an MOU, so therefore we give up. I'm not sure, remembering that, we're all politicians, we're all elected. The director is appointed by an elected official. Those numbers are going to change. Those individuals are going to change. The commission is going to change. And I want to make sure that we stay a consistent record of saying, here's where we're at. So that maybe 5 years or 6 years down the line, we have different people in there that say, well, we fought for this all along. I don't want to give it up.
Okay. All right, any other discussion? Mr. Nevitt.
Thanks, Jack. I usually sort of edge away from my incendiary friend when his hair catches on fire, but I don't know. I'm with Val on this. I don't think it's us trying to get into a grappling match with CDOT, but the letter recognizes the realities, recognizes what's going to happen, accedes to them, but also sends the message that everybody else may feel like they're not getting their fair share, but we're really not. And we're not backing down from that position, and so you're going to continue hearing from us, and I feel like that's worth saying in this context. We're not being uncooperative. We're just going to make sure that our point continues to be made, and we expect it to be heard.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Rozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I believe the chairperson for MVIC passed me over 3 times, Rachel Zenzinger.
He was
so thank you. And I was sitting in the same seat, Rachel. So he was just going to have to poke you with that.
He was in Connie's doghouse.
But I was a dissenting vote, and I will be a dissenting vote on this motion, too. In essence, we have come to a point for transportation funding where CDOT's in a tough situation. We as all of our, whether cities or counties, are in a tough situation. And instead of spending time trying to hash through an MOU, which is a document of let's play nice in each other's sandbox, in essence, because if you look at the termination agreement, and I apologize, Yes, in this big notebook that I have, I don't have the MOU with me because this is not my INVIC notebook. This is my Dr. Cog notebook. There's the termination clause in there that gives 30 days for any party to terminate. Why would we go through the effort and a non-collaborative effort to hash through an MOU to, instead of working together to get to the point of an MOU that is non-binding? That is, it just is, let's play nice. And instead of standing back and saying, you're in a tough spot, we're in a tough spot, let's work it out. Let's get through it, and let's take a different approach than a very legalistic MOU approach. That's what I would recommend here, and that's why I voted against the motion. I will, again, thank you.
Right. Mr. Vigil.
I guess I just need to rebut that. I think the issue is that who's to say that MOU does not contain exactly what you just said right now? Right. I mean, we're not saying that what is contained in the MOU. What's contained in here is this, let's get together and agree on something.
Hey, any other comments? Well, before I call the vote, I'm just going to say one thing. I was raised in a pretty poor family. We had simple rules of discipline, and if you backtalked, you got backhanded. And this letter's like backtalking after you've been told no. So, no, just kidding. But anyhow, the point is we need to move on here, and I think we all know what our feelings are. So, at this point in time, I am going to call the question. All those in favor, if you would please raise your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand.
Hey, Chris.
Just one, Jackie, just one. I came from a big family, too. I know how that works.
Only at dessert time.
The motion does pass. Any abstentions, excuse me, please raise your hand. Motion does pass. All right, we're moving on now to the next item on our agenda, which is item number 16. This is the point in time we are now at the end of, excuse me, one moment, clarification, Mr. Nivet? 17 to 11. 17 to 11, right. Moving on, now we're into item number 16. Item number 11 will follow that item. Item number 16 obviously is that item that will require a super vote. I would like to recognize Elise, please. Right, we still do not have, we need 29 to do that. So I would seek either we hear this item, which would be the prerogative of the group, or I can seek action for someone to continue it to May 15th, sir.
Mr. Chair, I move that we continue that action.
Second.
We have a motion to continue item number 16 to May 15th.
Could we?
We have a second. Now discussion, please. And on a motion for continuation, you can. We could have taken them as a solid. I was going to read that one next. Okay. Great. So the item is still standing. We have a motion. We have a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed, please raise your hand. Abstentions, please remove your hand. No, it's okay. It is. It does pass. Moving on to item number 11, Elise.
I'd like to make a motion that we postpone this until the next meeting as well.
Motion on the table is to continue this item to a date certain, May 15th, the next Dr. Cog board meeting. We have a second of that motion. So any discussion? All those in favor, please raise your hand. Opposed, please raise your hand. Abstentions? It does pass it. Both items are continued. We are now done with our action agenda. The floor recognizes Mr. Taylor for comment.
Well, I was just going to point out that on Saturday, May the 4th, is Wildfire Preparedness Day of Service.
Uh-huh. Uh-oh. Okay, we are now through with our action item on action agenda. We move on to our informational briefings. First item on our agenda is number 17, which is a presentation on the statewide CMAQ funding status for fiscal year 2014. Steve Cook, please.
Okay, and luckily no presentation. I'm just going to go over a couple of key points that are in attachment J of your packet. This memo is in response to a question raised at the MVIC meeting a couple weeks ago, kind of at the end of the meeting, asked questions about the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program, the CMAQ program, for fiscal year 2014. So for fiscal year 2014, the good news, CDOT reports having about 13 million more federal CMAQ dollars available than they had previously estimated. And we note that historically, DRCOG area has received about 80% of the statewide CMAQ funds. CDOT, in their action that's going to go to the Transportation Commission tomorrow, has proposed reserving the additional $13 million until after the Colorado Energy Office completes an alternative vehicle fuel infrastructure study later this summer. We're told that following the study, or following the completion of the study, there will be further discussions between CDOT, DRCOG, and the other CMAQ funding recipients across the state. And they will discuss the use and the distribution of those reserved funds, the approximately $13 million, and that they'll be discussed sometime later this summer or fall. So we just wanted to give you that update to the question that was raised at the MVIC meeting. And if there's any questions.
So, so if this project isn't chosen, will that funding be available to come back to local projects as it has in the past?
There is no specific project identified. Right now, these are just dollars that are put into reserve. They're going to conduct the study, and then at that time, bring everybody back together and decide what to do with the 13.
Well, I guess I'm wondering whether or not it would be useful for DRCOG to weigh in favor of freeing that money up for local projects, as has been the case in the past. I would think that we would want to continue that funding stream. And I don't know if anybody's asking our opinion, but that certainly would be mine.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel kind of the same way. I don't know if there was a trick I missed somewhere, but I'm kind of left scratching my head like, what? That money's not going to come back to us? You think I did miss a trick? It wouldn't be the first time, but yeah, I don't quite know. This is an informational item. It's not an action item, but insofar as well, that opinion could be articulated, I'd be certainly in favor of that. I don't like this at all.
Yeah, I would like to do is I'm going to ask Jennifer to comment on this. There's a couple things to keep in mind. There might be a point in which we have no control, but we're going to find out.
You'll see more of it too.
It's a new day. As we talked at the workshop, things are changing and people are changing how they do business, and we need to get nimble and flexible and pay attention. Actually, in February, Beth Humenick, who is your STAC representative, gave an extensive report explaining how this had happened, that CDOT had made projections as to how much CMAQ money would be available. As we got closer into the budget year, they realized that they had been conservative in projecting how much CMAQ would be available. There was going to be $13 million more than originally anticipated. And Steve Rudy made almost an identical report to the board the following month, and then we mentioned this again at the board workshop. We haven't actually asked you to take action. We've just continued to keep you apprised of the discussions that were going on at CDOT through their committee process. I keep referring to Deborah. She probably had no idea when she got on the DRCOG board she'd be called on so often to answer questions, but as we understand it, the money is, the commission is voting tomorrow to put this money into a reserve account until after this study is done by the Colorado Energy Office. And at that time, once that study is completed, then there will be additional discussion about the investment of that money. But Deb, please, if you have more to add, go for it.
So I'm going to back up a little bit. So the money that's in the reserve, this is something over past years that has been done. We did receive more money than we thought, but we've also in the past put money in reserve because we thought there would be new emission changes, new changes, and so more areas would become non-attainment, which means they are eligible for these funds, and so we did not want to have to take funds away from everyone, saying, okay, we have additional areas, so we need to take your funds back and give them their amount that's required by law. So there's been a reserve held in the past couple of years, and at the end of the year it's released if we don't have those new non-attainment areas. So, but we also did receive more funding than we thought we would. So the amount, before we knew how much funding we had what's called resource allocation. And so we said, okay, we thought this is how much money DRCOG's going to get, how much Pikes Peak, how much Telluride's going to get, because we're talking about PM10, ozone, and carbon monoxide. So it's not just DRCOG, and it's not just the Front Range. So based on that, what we're saying to Commission is go ahead and release those funds that we had identified. This is how much we think they're going to get. So those funds will be released. And then the funds that are over and above that amount, we're going to try and figure out what to do. There is a change in the legislation, and this is map 21 again. There's an opportunity, there's something new that's in the legislation that has not been there before. And that is you can do a statewide program for CNG or electric vehicle refueling stations. And that has not been allowed before in CMAQ. And that can be on a statewide basis. It's the only thing that you can do on a statewide basis that doesn't require you to be in a non-attainment or maintenance area. So we're not quite sure what to do with that. So the Governor's Energy Office has been looking at deployment of CNG and also EV, and they were going to come to the State Advisory Committee in June was the time period we were talking about. We were hoping they would come and fill us in about what they're doing, what they found out, just so we know a little bit more, and then at that point have discussions, okay, what do we do at this point? So money has not been allocated to that fund. It's really in reserve, like Jennifer has said. And so that's what's going to Commission is really a request that DRCOG can get additional funds in CMAQ because they were short in terms of the Transportation Alternatives Program. So that's a little complication, but in any case, that's really what's going to the Transportation Commission.
Thank you. Elise.
Just a quick follow-up question. If, for whatever reason, after the study this summer, the Commission decides not to go forward with that statewide program, what happens with the money?
So there's a resolution right now that we follow from the Transportation Commission, and it actually says how money is allocated throughout the states. A certain percentage goes to, if you're ozone, there's a different percentage. For PM10, there's a different percentage. For carbon monoxide. And then, based on that, then there's a further split in terms of population, and I believe it's VMT. Is that right? Yeah, I think it's population VMT. So it's a little bit complicated how the money is allocated throughout the state.
But just to follow up, that if I understand you correctly, then some portion based on that formula would come back to
yes.
DRCOG for traditional CMAQ projects at the local level if
there's no change to the resolution. That's correct.
And isn't that $10 million that's specified in this memo?
Approximately.
Approximately
Right.
10 of the
75
million.
Yeah, DRCOG, because you qualify under those three, and because your population and everything, it works out to be about 80%. So.
Okay. Mr. Nevitt, you had a question.
Yeah, I guess I'm still trying to get a handle on the proposition. That CMAQ money, it's 80% is our region, is the COG region because
Right
we're
now
not
under
attainment?
Deborah?
Right now, under CDOT's formula, maybe to back up a little bit, CDOT is not required to distribute it to anyone. CDOT could actually decide how to use that money, but our Transportation Commission in the past has decided to allocate it based on these formulas, and that was working with all the non-attainment and maintenance areas. We came up with that formula.
Right. So I guess it still seemed perverse to be taking money that would be focused on the principal non-attainment area based on the the chemical numbers, the VMT, the population, and essentially use that money on a program that for a statewide program. I mean, that might make a certain amount of sense in New Hampshire.
Are you recommending an MOU? No, just kidding. Deborah?
So if there is some sort of statewide program, that still means that I would imagine that you would be eligible for those funds under the statewide program. So it's not like all of a sudden the money goes away.
But
So-
we wouldn't have the flexibility of what to spend it on. You
Right.
would be telling us
But
what to spend it on.
you should be aware that
Time out one moment. I don't want to lose control here. You okay? So, yeah, Deborah, go ahead.
All right, so you should be aware that Dr. Cog in the past, as well as North Front Range, have actually had CMAQ funds they've spent on refueling stations and alternative fuel vehicles. So that's the type of program we're talking about. So it has been a traditional use by the MPOs. And you know, quite frankly, I would think what you've done in the past would help inform anything if there was some sort of statewide program. So I just wanted to throw that in there. This is not something that you haven't been doing already.
More questions for discussion? Okay. No, we're not doing an MOU. Oh, what? Chris, no, Mr. Nevitt, you had a question?
I guess, I don't know, maybe it's just the accumulation of subjects here, but, you know, we're the Dr. Cog region, we're 56 jurisdictions, we've got a whole bunch of diverse interests, but we work together to figure out what's best for the region. And that's sometimes a difficult process, sometimes a contentious process, but by God, we come together every time and get it done. And this is the third thing on our agenda where the answer is, you know what, you're not really going to do that anymore, Dr. Cog. This decision will be made by somebody else. Somebody else will figure out the formula. Somebody else will figure out the priorities. And don't worry, you'll get something. It'll be good. But you and the regional enterprise that we're engaged in, which is difficult. Lord knows these meetings last way longer than they ought to, but it's tough having all these different. Only when I'm here? No, that's not true. I know that. I mean, there's an enterprise we're engaged in as a region that I feel like we're now abandoning and letting someone else tell us how it's going to be done. And I don't know. It's like I said, maybe it's just the accumulation. This is the third item on our agenda where, we're no longer behaving as a region. We're just, got our little hats out, and what comes from the sky, we'll be happy to get and pour it on our heads.
Mr. McCoskey.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think that I can summarize it in 2 words, and it's MAP 21. It's not a decision that CDOT made. It's not a decision that it's a new environment, and it's not because another agency made a decision. It's our wonderful federal legislative activity or inactivity. We have a tradition, like you say, of being able to hammer it out and go home or go out and have a beer. But that doesn't seem to happen anymore where they're making these new sets of rules.
I would like to make a recommendation, too, for all the board members. I really do believe we do need to get up to speed on MAP 21, and we're going to have to figure out how that presentation is. And sitting on the NACO Transportation Subcommittee, and Dennis sits on it, I sit on it, several others probably in here do, too, from the county commissioners. We attend these meetings at the federal, and we have meetings with the FHA and others, and we understand the impacts. MAP 21 is serious business, ladies and gentlemen. It is really serious. It is the federal government saying we're going to manage how you will spend your money. Not how we want you to, but how you will spend your money. And you're going to have to create performance measurements, and you're going to show it to us. And if you don't reach attainment based upon our numbers that we're giving you, we're not going to send you any. Just like that. And the fact is they hold that power. Elise?
Jack, I think you make a good point, and we probably should educate ourselves. But I also, what Chris is saying does resonate with me, because part of it is how are we going to respond to this new situation that we're being handed, and whether or not we band together as a region and at least make our voice heard. Because what I'm hearing is that MAP 21 doesn't mandate that CDOT do a statewide project. It enables CDOT. And maybe that's a good idea, maybe not. But what about DRCOG actually having a voice and saying, we actually think the money flowing to our region and us tackling these emission issues based on our local accumulation of local viewpoints held together by a regional vision, that's a better way to make that decision than a statewide. We should at least, if we feel that way, and I think we should voice that. We are not powerless, or we should not just assume that we are powerless. Even in this changing environment, I think we should try to be DRCOG by, GSM and speak as one. So this is yet another example where it sounds like we're being handed something, and I think some of us are raising the question, should we actually respond as DRCOG and say, hey, wait a minute, we have an opinion on this?
Mr. Holden.
Well, I would agree with the comments made here. We are slowly abrogating our responsibility and decision-making process to bureaucrats in Washington. It's hard coming from a Democrat, but and I think we need to band together. And I agree with all the comments that have been made here. And I think the most effective way to do that is through our Jack and I go back to Washington frequently. I'm going there next week to meet with our delegations and clearly make the point that who knows better as to where those funds should go than those people that live in that region. And having worked in Washington, those decisions are a lot of times made without adequate input from the local government. So DRCOG has a position, and the organization has exercised its wisdom for the last 40 years, right? Almost 60 years. And we have, I think as representatives, have kind of been a little bit asleep at the switch over the last 10 years. And it's time now to band together and stand up and say, look, we can control our own destiny because we know what's best for us. And the only way to do that is to begin to voice those opinions to our elected officials and vote them out if they don't comply with our desires, period. That's how it works.
Any final comments on this item? Jennifer?
There has not been a motion on this. This was offered as informational. I'm just wanting to clarify whether or not there is a message that you want staff to give to CDOT about this. Historically, you've received about 80% of the CMAQ funding that comes to the region, to the state. The state receives these funds because we have non-attainment issues here. There has never been a rule that says the state has to allow the MPO to make the CMAQ decisions, but you have for many, many, many years. And you're right, Elise, there is no mandate that says that the state has to do this. It's just that MAP 21 says the state can do this. So if you want us to message to CDOT, now would be a good time.
Well, when is the deadline for that information? I mean, is it like, it's not tonight? I mean, do we have time to draft something before the next meeting? I'm just curious, or not?
Their meeting's tomorrow. Answer. Their meeting's
Deborah?
So I'm not quite sure what you mean by meeting. So starting next month, STAC you have representatives on STAC will be meeting with subcommittees to take a look at funding programs under MAP 21 to talk about that. So what does it mean? And so there's an opportune time for you to decide that, to provide your input as part of that. The other thing is, I'm curious what the study's going to say. We haven't made any decisions, so it's informational for us. I don't know if that's something that you'd like to share and have MBIC have a presentation or the TAC or something as well. I mean, that it's just information. That's the way we look at it, and we wanted to make any decisions with as much information as we could have. So there are no funding decisions other than making sure that you get the additional money that you didn't get under TAP because the funding levels are lower than we expected. There is nothing that's going to commission this month that would change your funding at this point.
Well, I think we could leave it, and I'm just going to take a prerogative to say this. The fact of the matter is that if those monies are diverted, then how do we, as not being in attainment, get the revenues necessary to reach or to maintain attainment where we're at? And that's part of the whole study issue that's got to be done. If you divert those funds, what programs become jeopardized in revenues and suddenly puts us even farther out of attainment? And then what do we have to do to regain that in order to put us back within attainment? And so the diversion of those funds has a consequence to it, and that becomes the concern is that, okay, has anyone studied and determined what that consequence is, number one, and number two, if you do decide to divert it, then what the plans are to ensure that this area is given the appropriate funding of some type or programs, I don't care if it's funding or programs, to come one way or another, that helps us to achieve attainment. Because right now we've been charged by getting these funds with achieving an attainment. That's really what's happened. And by those funds being diverted, I'm assuming that responsibility to help us achieve attainment goes with that money when you do that. And then who takes that on and that responsibility, and how do we assure that that's accomplished? And that's the message I think that has to be delivered through this process. That's fine. If you want to take on the funding and go with it, then take on the responsibility of achieving the attainment in our area. That's my viewpoint. Okay. Mr. Nevitt.
So what do we do, Mr. Chair?
Well, I don't think there's an action item, but I guess my question becomes, to me, is that we need to send that message, and that's why I just sent that message, was
That's it?
that is the message that I think they need to understand, which is simply that. If you're going to take the funding for us to get into attainment, then what's the program and the means by which you're going to then keep us into attainment, and know what those programs are that you're spending in our area, and then how are we going to begin to measure and determine that you are indeed, if you're going to divert the funds, helping us stay and maintain and get into attainment. I mean, that's really what it amounts to. Deborah, comment?
Yes, we have those same questions, and that's why we're waiting to see what comes out of this, because you're exactly right. So what is the most effective way to reduce emissions? So we want to take in all that information. So that's where we are right now.
So I'm assuming, based on what you're saying, that there's more to come, that decisions haven't been made.
Right.
Is there a deadline for a decision date?
No.
Okay. So I think we're going to be getting, and we have to schedule, and we would probably direct our staff to stay in close contact with this and the STAC to feed back to the board and MVIC regularly to determine what the status is and the outcomes of these processes, and that our input then can be garnered at that point in time in a manner that we think is appropriate. Does that make sense?
Enough.
Okay. With that, then, I think we will move on to our next informational item, which is committee reports. Report on, STAC. Beth.
Good segue.
Thank you. Sorry, I turned off the mic. Well, the first thing that we did at the STAC meeting was there was a recognition and a very nice plaque. I just printed out a copy of this. Was given to Steve Rudy for his service, the many years of service that he'd had on STAC. And a lot of the members said that they were really going to miss his insights and the continuity that he actually brought to the group through the years. And one thing that was mentioned too was that every agency needs someone to challenge it, and they thought Steve had done a great job on behalf of Dr. Cobb. So
And then he left after that because he had some stuff to finish up. I believe Friday was his last day. The Commission's statewide plan subcommittee and its transportation and intermodal subcommittee held a joint meeting discussing goals and objectives for transit as well as the 20-year revenue projections. And although the funding received for the new Transportation Alternatives Program, which is TAP, was less than the amount anticipated in resource allocation, the SWP committee recommended funding the program to the RA level with the exception of Dr.Cog, who had offered before to reduce their TAP funding, which is going to be backfilled fully by the CMAQ funds. And the commission has approved those recommendations, by the way. The regional commuter bus concept was also discussed, and a presentation from Bridge Enterprise on its proposal to allocate funds to bridge preservation was done to the whole committee. With regards to federal and state legislative update, Kurt Morrison talked about the fact that currently 637 bills and resolutions have been introduced, and CDOT is currently tracking 90 of those bills, of which approximately 40 have already been either postponed indefinitely or signed into law. The bills of interest that they are following very closely right now are House Bill 131110, which is a special fuel tax and electric vehicle fee, House Bill 131299, changes to the Smart Government Act of 2010, and Senate Bill 13203, which is limit use of government land for automotive service stations. And I apologize, I have a lot of notes, but I can't remember all of this without notes. The schedule for development with regards to the statewide plan, transportation plan, is being accelerated. CDOT is going to be working with the TPRs, and they're going to be holding a series of 2 to 3 meetings between mid-May and mid-October in order to examine transportation needs in their areas and to identify priorities if additional funds do become available. And projects might go with a ballot measure, which might come out of this planning process. Regarding program distribution, I think Deborah's done a lot of talking tonight. Working with OFMB, the STAC subcommittee developed revenue projections for the next 20 years for use in the statewide plan. The next focus for STAC is program distribution, which is somewhat different than the old resource allocation process. A subcommittee of the STAC, which Deborah's talked about, will consider MAP 21 requirements and look at the distribution formulas for RPP, faster safety, TAP, and CMAQ for fiscal year 15 and beyond. The subcommittee's recommendations are going to be coming back to the full STAC for discussion, which Deborah mentioned, and then STAC's recommendations will go before the commission. And they ask at the meeting that anybody on STAC that was interested in participating in the program distribution subcommittee was to volunteer and sign up with a staff member that they had allocated. And so we don't know who's going to be on that subcommittee at this time. As Deborah touched on, CDOT has already begun moving forward ramp projects. A list was distributed showing that $172 million has now been advanced into fiscal year 13. Of that, $144 million is fiscal year 14 funding. And the vast majority are surface treatment projects. These selections were driven by the asset management system, and several of the projects were actually larger than had been seen in the past. Dr. Cog had asked if it was possible to look at fiscal year 16 and beyond now, and the response was basically that doing anything with projects in fiscal year 16 and fiscal year 17 is kind of uncertain at this time just because of allocations. A second handout that we all received provided sort of a snapshot of projects that are proposed for acceleration using RPP and faster safety funding, and included some projects advanced from fiscal year 15 to 14. STAC members were asked to review information on the RAMP website following the meeting so that we're better versed when we come back for the next month's meeting. And partnership projects selected will come to STAC before they actually go to the commission, so that hasn't changed. Then we talked about the Impact 64 and potential 214 ballot question on transportation. A group of Metro mayors and the commissioners formed a task force to talk about potential methods for raising funds for transportation. That group, together with Club 20, Action 22, Progressive 15, CCI, and CML, as well as some others, actually are part of that task force. Some poll results that the group had conducted were discussed, and one of them was a gas tax, which did not fare too well, but a sales tax that was actually polled actually fared a little bit better. In the responses that they got, I was just trying to remember what else they said. There's been a lot of discussion around vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, but since the gas tax didn't pull well, VMT actually pulled even much lower than that. So for now, regarding funds raised, about a third would go to transit, and road funds would be divided between CDOT and locals using HUTF funds, a formula that CDOT has, and CDOT might roughly get about $250 million a year. Sorry, I was scratching out some of my notes, so I'm not reading them very well. As Deborah mentioned, the MPAC 64 members are going to continue to look at possible ways to address all the unmet needs and the funding for transportation, because there are a lot of them in our state currently. They are interested in investigating the possibility of going to a ballot measure, but it probably won't be until next year or later on. It's going to depend on what other additional information comes in. And members at the meeting actually cautioned that care should be taken so that the approach doesn't leave rural Colorado behind, because there was a lot of concern about smaller communities in rural Colorado. And then we also talked about the Advanced Guideway System, or AGS study. And currently the study faces three main questions: technical feasibility, land use feasibility, and governance feasibility. 3 potential alignments had been anticipated. However, as they did further analysis, and now it's looking like it points to 4. Speeds over 150 miles per hour are not going to be feasible. The mountain terrain would require too many miles of tunnels, and with maglev, it would require even more. The study is now examining a 120-mile corridor that would originate from Golden. They're talking and have presented some very generalized station locations which are being evaluated. These stations will actually require a significant amount of land and infrastructure. The ridership model tells how fast a rider could get from point A to point B, with the resulting timing helping to determine the attractiveness of where they're placed. It's important to go where there is the greatest ridership, of course, and the ridership that will support the fare box recovery. So towards the end here of this presentation, CDOT is continuing to go to partnership people using scenarios based on best available information that they have, asking their opinions on financial feasibility. So that, as Deborah mentioned, there's a lot more to come because there's a lot of stuff being discussed right now, and CDOT doesn't know what's going to happen because these task force have not met and have not really gone through the thorough discussions and asked all the questions yet.
Thank you very much. Metro mayors, in the fact that Mr. Tisdale is not president, do I have to pick a mayor, or can you raise your hand? No, he's got a report forwarded. Well, attachment K is the administrative committee.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. It's in mine. It's in mine.
It's not in the online version.
Okay, let me have it. Okay, so here's the report from Metro mayors. Ladies and gentlemen, let's see if I can get it. In my no, just kidding. It's in an effort to streamline the April 17th DRCOG board meeting and respecting the time of the board members, acknowledging the virtual unlimited capacity of members to read and digest written information in advance of the board's meeting and to avoid redundant and respective reputation exercise, I have included here within the copy of the minutes of. He just spent 20 minutes saying how he wanted to respect our time. This is freaking amazing. And the answer to that question is, guess what? We're not going to read these minutes. So, okay. Anybody want to give us a brief? Nope, we don't have one. Moving on to item number 3, which would be C, which would be report from the Metro Area County Commissioners. Mr. Rozier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief. our last Metro Area County Commissioners, our MAC meeting, was held at Arapahoe County, and I'd like to thank Commissioner Holland for allowing us to be there. And our primary discussion has been this entire year, and will continue to be this year, revolving around economic development and where counties are at in working with the cities and also working with the state. In keeping with that theme, we had Ken Lunn and Dave Farrell present at the meeting, brought us up to date on what the state is looking at, what they are doing to coordinate with the counties and with the economic development corporations throughout the state. They presented to us a rollout of what's called the Insight program, which I would encourage you all to go on and take a look at that. And it's a way for site selectors and or corporations who are looking to relocate. It provides them with that tool that they can log on to this to the state site, and they are able to see available properties, specific properties. They put in some parameters that meets their needs, and it will pop up. So it's not just specific to a certain geographic area. They're looking to look at statewide. Along with that, we also have El Paso County, who's looking to come up and, as I call, audit the MAC meetings. They are quite encouraged with the economic development activities that we're looking into, and so they were invited to or allowed to come up and audit our meetings. And then also, I just wanted to bring up that our next meeting, which will be on April 26th, will be quite a large meeting, actually. It's a collaborative meeting with all of our economic development corporations throughout our counties, to bring them together to work collaboratively, to look at where we can build off of what one EDC is doing, see what each EDC is working on, and how we can work together and not work against each other when it comes to encouraging business retention, expansion, and also new business in town. I will unfortunately not be there, as April 26th is the grand opening for the W line. So we will be having an opening celebration at the Taj, or otherwise known as the Jefferson County Courts and Administration Building. But if you say that, nobody knows what you're talking about. And hopefully we will not have 2 feet of snow on the ground, so that's next Friday.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Advisory Committee on Aging, Cliff Mueller.
We had no meeting, so no report.
Thank you very much. The Regional Air Quality, we have Joyce Thomas and Jackie Millay.
We have our next meeting this Friday.
Is that your report?
That's my report.
That's Joyce's report.
You sticking to it?
Yeah,
okay.
exactly.
MetroVision Implementation Task Force, Mr. Taylor.
I have no report.
Beautiful. Report on E470 Authority. Mr. Rakowski is not here. Is there any other member? Ms. Millay.
And frankly, I think the only thing of relevance to this group is if you haven't paid your E470 tolls, they're actually going to start putting holds on vehicle registrations potentially in October of 2013. So they've been, the legislature has allowed them to do this for a while. They haven't been doing it, but I don't recall the exact number, but there's a significant amount of revenue that has not been, yes, it is millions, that has not been collected on E470, and they're going to look at doing that.
I think the number is about $14 million.
Yes.
In unretrievable revenue. So I think this is going to be a good opportunity to improve the cash flow for E470.
And of note, I'd like to also comment that E470 is working with the HPTE to look at kind of the tolling model that was established by E470 and how that system might be expanded to include the HPTE, so they're not going to be reinventing the management system that exists. And I think it's really a great example of efficient government. So I think that's great that they're doing that. Oh,
okay. Oh, yes.
Jim.
Mr. Benson.
Well, there were a couple of other things. I'll try to be brief because
I was not that one. Sorry.
Well, that's,
only at one of them.
one of the things that was discussed was a bill that Beth mentioned in her report that would prohibit the Public Highway Authority from putting in a convenience store on like a road like E470 at the former toll plazas before we went cashless. And I don't know, Deborah, maybe it seems to me like the story was that CDOT wants this to happen. They want to prohibit this from happening. I'm not sure about that, but can you comment on that and maybe give us a reason why CDOT would take that position, if that is their position? I don't. Okay.
I thought that bill was killed, so
Good.
I'm looking, but I'm not sure, so let me look.
1223.
I got the idea that there was some life still left in it. Is that what you guys got? I don't know.
Yeah, 1223.
Yeah. But that'll be something that you might see in the future on E470 as a convenience store type thing at the toll plazas. It'll make some money for us, and maybe we'll be able to do some more improvements. I think all of you have noticed the improvements in the median. They put in where the grass had died, they put in rock, and a lot of other improvements. They put in deer fences along E470. A lot of money's being spent out there to make it a great experience to drive on it. And also, I wonder if any of you have ever heard of the traffic engineering marvel called a diverging diamond. But, well, I think Denny has, because they're going to put one at Interstate 36 and McCaslin, and they're going to put one at Quebec and E470, but I don't think any of us have ever seen anything like this. It's like you'll come up, you get off of E470, you're going to stay on the left side of the road. You're going to make a left-hand turn. You're going to be on the left side of the road. And if you're going straight, you're going to cross over at the other end. You're going to have a light at each end like you do it anyway. But I just thought instead of having a roadside sobriety test, this would be a roadway sobriety test. I mean, take somebody that you suspect of being drunk to try to see if they can get through this thing.
Well, maybe you have to be drunk to get through it.
But they say that it's safer. It's been tested in other parts of the country. And it takes up less space, which is one
Less land.
reason. They don't have to buy as much land to get an interchange. But you'll see that on McCaslin. How soon do you think that's going to happen, Denny?
Depends on how much snow we get.
Right.
We need all we can handle with the water shortage.
Okay. All righty.
But that's a good idea.
Thank you very much on that. One thing I would like to point out for those of you who have not been, or who use the E470, have not been on the board, you know, you may hear all this stuff in the paper about the penalties. The board has been, I know in the past, very, very liberal on trying to get it to make a gentler, kinder, friendlier type environment, and they really have. It used to be pretty harsh before. The penalties started rocking, they mounted up fast. So now they changed it. So I, fortunate enough, had to go to Kansas this weekend for turkey hunting, but one of my family members hands me this pink envelope from E470 and says, I'm not paying this. It was a $7.30 toll that now has $50 worth of fines added to it, okay? And I'm looking at this saying, what are you talking about? Just to tell you how kind and gentle they are, that was May of 2012. And it was just like, that's how long, and when you talk about our AR problem, because we respond to the public's, don't beat me up, don't beat me up, don't beat me up, and then they don't pay, they don't pay, they don't pay, they don't pay. So, by the way, paid that one. So anyhow, but it's crazy. Okay, moving on to the last item, and that, ladies and gentlemen, would be our next meeting is May 15, 2013. Are there any other matters the members would like to bring forward at this point?
Hey, Chris, do you want to update on Paul?
Oh, yes, thank you. I was going to ask that. Would you please give us an update on Paul Ryan?
I gave a little update to the administrative committee. I'm sorry I forgot to do it here. My colleague, Paul Ryan, isn't here tonight because he's in the hospital. He's in a medically induced coma after his appendix burst, and then there were complications associated with infection and other issues. So he's in the intensive care unit and not in good shape at all. Needless to say, we all hope he recovers from this, but it's definitely a life-threatening situation he's facing. So if you go on Caring Bridge, I think that's what it's called, Caring Bridge. There's a Caring Bridge entry for him. So you just go on Carrington Bridge and you can look up Paul Ryan and you can get updates there. But
And
yeah.
you can leave comments too.
Yeah.
Okay. So many of you, I think we all know Paul. He's a member of DRCOG. He goes around the community quite a bit. So please keep him in your prayers and keep his family there too. Thank you very much. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we are adjourned.